Okay, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wa salatu wa salam ala Sayyidil Anbiya'i wal Mursaleen, Allahumma alimna ma yanfa'una wa anfa'na bima tu'allimuna wa zidna bifadlika ilman wa ta'liman innaka ala kulli shay'in qadir. Okay, so it says Bab as-sabaq fil khayl. As-sabaq fil khayl. So this is using horses for racing. So what's the problem here is we've already seen that in financial transactions you have to have clarity. Right? So when you have a horse race, right? Salah and I have a horse race, and I say I will give you $100 if I can beat you, if I beat you in this race. Then where's the clarity there? Like, does he know whether he's going to get the money or not? No, he doesn't. So that's fundamentally problematic, right? And that's the whole idea of gambling, right? You can't gamble because you know you don't know if you're going to win or not. There's no clarity, so you can't do things like that, right? So whenever you have financial transactions, you have to have clarity. There's no clarity in horse racing or any of these competitions. So how can it be halal? So that's the original question. So he says, أخبرنا مالك أخبرنا يحيى بن سعيد قال سمعت سعيد المسيب يقول. So he says, Imam Malik informed us, narrating from Yahya ibn Sa'id al-Ansari, the great Mufti of Medina, from Sa'id ibn Musayyib. This is again, another great Muftis of Medina, the son-in-law of Abu Hurairah. And he said, ليس برهان الخيل ليس برهان الخيل بأس إذا أدخلوا فيها محللا إن سبق أخذ السبق وإن سبق لم يكن عليه شيء. So this is a very important quote here because it tells us a lot about the structure of the four madhahib. And it's something that I have tried to talk about in basically all of my classes, is that number one thing about the four madhahib is pluralism, right? There's more than one way of understanding things. Number two is that they're all based on the fiqh of the Salaf. They're all based on the fatwa of the Sahaba and Tabi'een. And when you take that out and you say, I just follow Quran and Sunnah, you actually come up with something really weird and strange. So here, if you look in the Shafi'i school in principle, theoretically, is only based on the Quran and Sunnah, right? We do not follow the fatwa of a Sahabi or a Tabi'i. That's not revelation, right? Sa'id Musayyib, let alone, so Abu Hurairah, let alone his son-in-law, you know, is not a prophet, right? They're not a prophet. So why are we even going to use this? So for Imam Malik, he's going to use this. He's going to say, if you have a horse race, okay, the three of us, for example, we have a horse race, and I say, okay, I'm going to put down $100. Muhammad Sabir puts down $100, and Salah puts down nothing. Whoever wins gets the money. You get $200. So if I win, I get to keep my $100 that I put in, and I get Muhammad Sabir's $100. If Muhammad Sabir wins, he gets to keep his $100 and the $100 that I put down. If Salah wins, he gets to keep $200. If I lose $100. If Muhammad Sabir loses, he loses $100. If Salah loses, he loses nothing. So here, this fatwa of Sa'id Musayyib is saying that as long as you have a muhallil, you have one person who can win but not lose. So you have 1,000 competitors, 999 of them have put down $100. Okay? And one person didn't put down a single thing, that's fine. Then whoever wins the race gets whatever 9,990, right? So here, why is this important? Because this is the Shafi school right here. But it's not quoting a hadith, nor is it quoting the Shafi, nor is it quoting nor is it quoting nor is it quoting a hadith or verse of Quran or anything. So in the Shafi school, our proof, quote unquote, that we use, I'm just trying to find it right now, is Number one, the general idea that where is it? The general idea that when things are vague and unclear, here we go, 349. You can't have a contract like that. And number two, you can see here, 349. 249. Just trying to find it here, 249. So we have a weak hadith to the same effect. It says, it's narrated from Abu Hurairah that he said, من أدخل فرسا بين فرسين وهو لا يأمن أن يسبق فلا بأس به فإن أمن فهو قمار. Okay, there's a weak hadith in Abu Dawood and Imam Ahmad, and it says from Abu Hurairah, whoever puts one horse between two horses, right? That was a scenario. It's either a horse race, meaning the horses are running, or people are riding the horses, right? وهو لا يأمن أن يسبق, and he knows that that third horse will not he knows that and it's it's a real competition, meaning any of them could win, then it's fine. Okay, so basically, as long as you have a third person, it's okay. A third person, who could not do it. So the Shafi school basically is like based on that weak hadith. He's like, that's it. It's kind of a bit odd, like our evidence is that weak hadith. That's basically it. But in reality, what the Shafi school is doing the following. The Shafi school comes along, Imam Shafi comes along, in the context of existing fiqh ideas. There is an existing Kufan school of fiqh, there is an existing Meccan school of fiqh, an existing Medinan school of fiqh, there's Fatawa, and Imam Shafi'i is looking at this in terms of which is stronger, in terms of following the ideas in the Quran, the ideas in the Hadith, analogy, etc. And he's picking and choosing and weighing up. So in reality, what's happening is Imam Shafi is using this fatwa here, right? And he's adding other evidence as well. Does that make sense? So there's a big difference in somebody coming with just all I'm looking at is opening the Mus'haf. I'm just opening, the 6 books and trying to come up with a conclusion, versus I have an existing body of fiqh from the Sahaba and Tabi'een. It's very expansive, it's very sophisticated, and I'm weighing it up and I'm tweaking it. Does that make sense?
It's like corroboration.
Corroboration, but also building on something that exists already, right?
Okay.
Like, for example, what's your job again, Muhammad Salah? You do computer engineering?
Yeah.
So you discovered the electron.
No.
No, that was done way before you, right? And
Right.
circuits and transistors, and like there was a ridiculous amount of work that was done before you came to the scene. You're like one ant in this gigantic pile of ants working on this process. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Right. So that's what Imam Shafi is, right? Imam Shafi is this mega ant, right? Stuff I'm not trying to say disrespectful, but like working with this huge thing, right? There's already an existing system. So now you come along and you say, oh, I'm going to do the same thing that Imam Shafi did. And you're not aware that he came into the world when there was already an existing system, and you ignore his system, you will now be surprised at his conclusions, and you will actually laugh at them. And you will like say, oh, there's no evidence. There's no evidence for this. You
Yeah, that
know?
happens a lot. They say, "Oh, this hadith is weak," and that's it. Like,
Exactly. And so you're surprised, like, yeah, so now the hadith is weak, but you already have a fatwa of Sahaba and Tabi'een before you. And so you are looking at this already pre-existing systems and you're just trying to weigh them up. Like, oh, so you mean you use the weak hadith to like weigh up a pre-existing argument. So yeah, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Right? Otherwise, you're kind of like, your dalil is one hadith that is arguably sahih and it's in Ibn Majah, who was in the 3rd century. Like, that's your dalil? That's kind of odd, Like, where does this even come from? So this is what you'll find is to just look at Shafi's fiqh, which in principle is based on just the 4 things: Quran, Hadith, consensus and analogy, but you will find like key fatwa from Sahaba and Tabi'een that find themselves into this book. Like you go through sentences in a fatwa from a Sahabi or fatwa from so and so, and you're going to find it copy and paste basically in the Shafi school, in the Hanbali school, in the Maliki school, in the Hanafi school. So in the Hanafi and Maliki school, it's very overt. It's very overt because Imam Malik will say, this is what the scholars do in Medina, therefore it's the deen of Allah. That's very overt. But it's the important thing is it's not just a Maliki thing or not just a Hanafi thing. It's actually the former madhahib. And when somebody comes along and cuts out that slice of the information and just says, just Dalil, just Quran and Sunnah, they actually end up inventing a new deen. That's what's going to happen. Go ahead, Salah.
Um, I guess I'm curious then because I know a while ago you mentioned like there's like a spectrum basically of who uses pre-existing fatwa from like Sahaba
Yeah.
Tabi'in, like the Salaf, and then there's like the other end of that spectrum is like they focus more on a hadith. Is that essentially the principle you're mentioning now, where it's like okay, if there isn't any fatwa, then they go to that degree, or is it always
Yeah,
building
so
upon where they yeah.
theoretically, Imam Shafi'i spelt out what is a proof of morality. And he's saying morality, halal and haram, is based on revelation. It is not based on what Salah says or Farid says, or what Sayyidina Umar says, or what anybody else says. So there are four sources of morality. That's it. But that's what he says theoretically, right? Theoretically, he's saying that just these four things, right? But practically, he actually has a heavy reliance on the fatwa of the Sahaba and Tabi'een. So this is this issue, like the difference between what's happening theoretically and what's happening in practice. And so it is true to say that the Shafi school, compared to the Maliki school, or compared to even the Hanbali school or the Hanafi school, has the least reliance on the fatwa of Sahaba Tabi'een and the most reliance on the text, the quote, of the verse of the Quran and Hadith itself. Right? An example of that is joining Dhuhr and Asr in rain. Right? Joining Dhuhr and Asr in rain. So there's a hadith that says that it comes in the Imam Malik narrates it in the Muwatta, and others narrate it. That it's in the six books, you find it there. That the Prophet ﷺ joined Dhuhr and Asr and Maghrib and Isha in Medina for no reason. Some mention without any fear and without any travel. Others mention without any fear, without any rain. But it's there. Basically, like he just joined Dhuhr and Asr and he joined Maghrib and Isha. So there's various explanations of this. But how does Imam Malik do this? Imam Malik looks at the hadith and says, here's the hadith, but how is it applied? In Medina, they join Maghrib and Isha. So basically, he kind of ignores the hadith and just applies half of it. Right? There we go. Like, khalas, this is what they do in Medina. Nobody joins Dhuhr and Asr in rain. So, khalas, we just join Maghrib and Isha in rain and that's it. Imam Shafi comes along and says, well, the hadith is super sahih, right? It's Imam Malik narrating from, I can't remember the chain here it was a short, very short chain, very super sahih hadith. You find it in Bukhari, Muslim, everywhere. And the hadith says, Dhuhr and Asr and Maghrib and Isha. So Imam Shafi says, the hadith says that. Do we have consensus? Is it, no, all Muslims agree that you can't join Dhuhr and Asr for rain? Says no. So Imam Shafi'i, number one, he gets the idea of rain from Imam Malik. Imam Malik says, I think it's in rain, and Imam Shafi says, I think it's in rain. It doesn't mention rain. So he's following precedents, and that would make sense. But he says, how can we follow half of the hadith? So Imam Shafi says, yeah, you can join Dhuhr and Asr and rain, why not? The hadith mentions it, A, and B, it doesn't go against consensus. So notice then, that's the Shafi school. The Maliki school does not allow that, and the Hanbali school does not allow that either. The Hanbalis do not allow you to join. You can't join in a group for rain. You can't join Dhuhr and Asr in a group for rain. You can't do that. That's only the Shafi school. So the Shafi school is, in that example, is the one who's following the hadith the most, the literal. Whereas Imam Malik is following the precedent, looking at the hadith through the thick lens of what did the scholars of Medina do. Imam Abu Hanifa is looking at it through the thick lens of what the scholars of Kufa do. They don't join prayers, period, unless they're on Hajj. And Imam Ahmad doing the same thing. Imam Ahmad is interpreting the hadith in the context of what did many of the Sahaba do, which is they did not join Dhuhr, Asr, and Rain. So even Imam Ahmad's doing that. There's other examples where Imam Ahmad goes against a hadith and follows the fatwa of a Sahabi over it. So Imam Ahmad is more dependent on the fatwa of the Sahaba and Tabi'een than Imam Shafi'i. But the point is, there's still dependence. Imam Shafi is not working in a vacuum. He did not come along and just read hadiths and Quran. He didn't do that. That's not what he was doing.
Yeah, compared Malik and Kufa,
Exactly.
like
So,
basically Medina Kufa. Yeah.
so it's true to say he relies on him less, but he's still relying on them. So now, if you cut that out and I cut that out aggressively, you will actually have a new deen. That's what you'll do. You say, no, I'm just Quran Sunnah khalas. Like ijma is very difficult to prove on many scenarios. Qiyas, everyone can do with that, however qiyas they want to do it. And then I'm going to understand the Quran in my way. I'm going to understand the hadith in my way, and you're going to end up with a new deen. That's what you'll do. Like if you ignore the salaf, right, you will come up with a new deen. That's why, as like a methodology, as a da'wah, I teach the Muwatta of Imam Malik, the Muwatta of Imam Shafi'i from Imam Malik, and why I just started teaching Kitab al-Athar by Imam Abu Hanif, because it's so important. Like it's so important because you see, like, oh, there is this, there are these layers that you're missing, and if you miss them, you will create your new deen. And I've taken another example, hijab. Right, ask ChatGPT. You have ChatGPT, Salah?
I do not touch AI at all, alhamdulillah. Like I just avoid
Okay,
it.
you avoid it. Okay, anyway. Google, okay, Gemini, right? Like, what's the proof for hijab? It's like
Okay,
the
yeah.
verse of the Quran is not super clear, really. And the hadith is like one hadith in Abu Dawood, which is arguably sahih. Like so if you're going to be annoying, you'd be like, yeah, there's no deal. There's no deal, bro. It's like, so you just want to ignore Sahaba and Tabi'een. You're like, yeah, it's no deal. Don't have to wear hijab. And you can do that with a whole slew of things. And eventually you'll come up with your own religion. That's what you have. It's like a new Islam. It's like, I mean, bad example, but Catholicism versus Protestantism. It's like every 2 minutes you're going to have a new brand of Protestantism, which is like reads the Bible in their own way. It's like totally different, all the time. Um, so it's not a perfect analogy, but it's a bit like that. Go ahead, Salah.
Just one more. Do you have an example of the opposite where Imam Shafi'i says there's all this like the ijma is so strong that I'm not even going to consider the is that like another I'm sorry?
Yeah. So, for example, Taraweeh. So, Imam Shafi, he says, he travels the world, and he's like, everybody prays 20 rakats. There's not a single hadith or not a single Sahih hadith about 20 rakats. So he just says, look, everybody is praying 20 rakats, and in Medina they're praying 36, and so he says you can pray 36 in Medina. So he basically treats what people are doing as legislation. That is revelation. So he's kind of like that whole discussion of 20 rakahs or 36 rakahs in Medina, that is totally based on what he saw early Muslims doing. That's all. He has other examples like that. Yeah, like and there's certain issues, for example, that are in theory debated. Like it's not actually consensus, but it's like 90% consensus. So what you'll often find is he just ignores that discussion. He's not going to be like, okay, so in principle, it's like, is there a verse in the Quran? No. Is there a hadith? No. Is there an analogy? No. Is there consensus? No. So it should be like, oh, it's halal then. But in practice, what you find is the Sahaba and Tabi'een, they themselves shunned fringe opinions. Whenever they found like only one Sahabi gave their fatwa, only one, they kind of shunned it. The next generation shunned it even more. And so, even though there is in principle no scholarly consensus, they will treat it like scholarly consensus and not even entertain the discussion. So, I think, like, for example, the issue of like touching the Quran without wudu, it is not agreed upon. Imam Malik in the Muwatta, he says, he quotes the verse in Surah Al-Waqi'ah, لا يمسه إلا المطهرون, and he says the best explanation I have of this ayah is that you can't touch the can't touch the mushaf without wudu. He says the best. He's not saying the only, right? So the Imam Malik's not using like an absolute terms. But by the time of Imam Shafi, as far as I know, does not even discuss that as an issue. Like it's just assumed. We're not. I'm not even going to discuss whether or not you can touch the mushaf without wudu. We all agree on that. So it's not actually consensus, but it's close enough. So that's also another thing. The difference between theoretically is this consensus and then practically is this consensus, right? So you can ask the same question, if the four madhahib agree on something, does that make a consensus? Well, technically, no. Okay, well, practically, yes, because like, what else are you going to follow?
Yeah.
It's like, okay, I mean, like, do all cars use this mechanism? Saying no, there's probably another car, like, here's this random car that is made in like Vietnam that you could, in principle, export to America. Do you want to buy it? Like, no, I'm not going to buy it. Like, would you drive a Vietnamese car? Like, I don't know, like random, Like Toyota's doing this, Volkswagen's doing this, BMW's doing this, you know, whatever. Like, these are all like the known things, the known tried and tested systems. They must be safe and good. And something that's kind of fringe is just going to ignore it practically, right? So, that does happen quite a lot. Wallahu. So the point is here we have this weak hadith in Ibn Majah. I don't know. You look it up. You'll find like hadiths here and there that kind of prove this point. But it's like, oh, what's your actual proof? Give me 1 second. I just want to look somewhere else as well. So it's important because often we will be quoted proofs, but the proofs are actually much more multi-layered than we imagine. That's the key concept. And there's a whole layer of discussions, particularly for the Sahaba and Tabi'in that we ignore. I'm just going to quickly try to find this here. Musabaqa Munadala 572. I'll give another example as well in the Hanafi school, right? 572. So Hanafis, they'll quote this hadith that they say that the Hanafis say you can't pray parallel to a woman, right? So you are praying in a masjid, and there's another woman who's praying behind the same imam as you, and you're parallel to her, right? They say that your prayer is invalid, right? So what's the evidence for that? Say, oh, there's a hadith from the Prophet ﷺ that says, "Akhiruhunna haythu akharahunna Allah." Uh, put them, have them go back to where Allah put them. Right? Have them go back to where Allah put them. So, and they say this hadith is widespread, and it's like almost like mutawatir from the Prophet ﷺ. So, like you find people commenting this hadith and like this hadith is not even sahih, let alone widespread. So, how is this your evidence? And then you open up Kitab al-Athar by Imam Muhammad, and they're not even quoting anything like that whatsoever. Rather, this is the fatwa of Ibrahim al-Nakhai. Ibrahim al-Nakhai is like the biggest student, the biggest grand student of Abdullah Mas'ud, right? He's like the Sa'id al-Musayyib, right? Here's Sa'id al-Musayyib in Medina. They have Ibrahim al-Nakhai in Kufa. He's like super big. Everybody's taking his hats off to him. Everybody goes back to him. Everybody defers to him. And so when he says something, I was like, yeah, great. He's right. So that makes sense, right? Like, I don't know what his dalil is. I don't know why he's saying that. He said, yeah, if you pray but you and that other sister are praying behind the same Imam and she's parallel to you, your prayer doesn't count, right? That sounds like a reasonable piece of information for me because like he's a super scholar. If everybody at his time revered him and respected him, he must have some evidence. I don't even know what his evidence is, but that's good enough for me. Like he visited Aisha, he was of that period of time very early on. So, no issues. I'm very happy following him, right? So the point is you're almost like making the madhab look silly because your proof your explanation is based on a non-evidence when in reality it's actually based on this fatwa of Ibrahim Nakhai. Just say it like that, khalas, right? And then it suddenly makes sense to people. Does that make sense, Salah and Muhammad?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm just quickly looking here. So I'm just looking here in a commentary in Hajj al-Talibin by Imam Mahalli. He doesn't mention, he just mentions it. It mentions the rule, but does not mention the hadith or anything. So just mentioning it as if it's just like, so basically the proof would just be analogy, right? But it's not just analogy. There's a difference between, I'm going to climb a mountain, right? I'm looking at the mountain from two sides. It would make sense to go this way, it makes sense to go that way, but I don't know which is the best, right? Versus I come to the mountain and I'm trying to judge which way would be best. And I also see 10 people going one direction. So then look at it and say, well, there's this side and there's that side. This has pros and that has pros and cons on both sides. And I see, well, 10 people over the last 10 years have gone up this side. It would make sense to follow them, right? So this is the difference between precedent and taqleed. Taqleed is, I'm just going to do what you do. That's called taqleed. Precedent is, let me just think about your argument and then see if it makes sense to me. So there's a fine line between them. But when you come along and just ignore all precedent and come up with your own fatwa, you have serious problems. Anyway, that makes sense there. Wallahu alam. So he says, قال محمد وبهذا نأخذ إنما يكره من هذا أن يضع كل واحد منهما سبقا فإن سبق أحدهما أخذ السبقين جميعا فيكون هذا كالمبايعة فأما إذا كان السبق من أحدهما أو كانوا ثلاثة والسبق من اثنين منهم والثالث ليس منه سبق إن سبق أخذ وإن لم يسبق لم يغرمه فهذا لا بأس به وهو المحلل الذي قال السعيد المسيب. Right, so he mentions the same thing. He says the whole idea is you have to have at least one person who could not lose. Right? So they could all win, but at least one person who is a real competent, right, and could not lose. And he says this is the fatwa of Sa'id al-Musayyib. So أخبرنا مالك أخبرنا ابن شهاب أنه سمع سعيد المسيب يقول إن القصواء ناقة النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم كانت تسبق كلما وقعت في السباق فوقعت يوما في إبل فسبقت فكانت على المسلمين كآبة إن سبقت فقال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إن الناس إذا رفعوا شيئا أو أرادوا رفع شيء وضعه الله. قال محمد هذا نأخذ لا بأس بالسبق في النصل والحافر والخف. So he doesn't mention the whole thing here. So right at the end, just explain. So there's a whole other conditions in the Shafi school that they mention is that is that this is an exception, as we mentioned, right? There's a level of ambiguity, like who's going to win. So number one, we have to have one person who could win and not lose, and number two, we have to make sure that things are defined, right? There's a defined like what does it mean to win. And number three, in the Shafi school, they stipulate it's not just any competition; it has to be a competition that has to do with warfare. So marksmanship, horse riding, racing, something like that, right? Not something like, I don't know, spelling bee or um, I don't know, something else, right? So, for example, marksmanship, right? So Salah, he says, that's it, I'm retiring. I'm becoming a lone wolf. I'm going to travel the states, especially the southern states, and compete with people in shooting competitions, right? So he walks up to somebody, and he says, I've got $10,000 in my pocket. It's yours if you can beat me, but you've got to put down $10,000. So Salah could lose. So they got to get, for example, they're going to be shooting at a target, and whoever gets the bullseye the most, or whatever agreed upon thing. There's a clear definition of what it means to win, right? And there's three people. Salah puts down 10,000. Competitor number two puts down 10,000, and competitor number three puts down nothing. Right. So number three could win 20,000, or Salah could keep his 10,000 and get another 10,000, and competitor number two could keep his 10,000, etc. And Salah, that's his job. Just walks around challenging people in that way. Right? That's all he does. Halal money, totally fine. And so why is this okay? We've kind of taken it slightly out of the picture of gambling. We've defined things, and it's to do with jihad. So there's a maslaha shar'iyya, right? It's useful for the Muslims if people are good at shooting, if people can ride horses well, if they can do things to do with jihad, right? It's a general useful thing, as opposed to spelling bee, Arabic poetry competition. In the Shafi school, you cannot do that. Poetry competition or fiqh competition or Quran competition, you can't do that, right? So you could just give prizes to kids, right? That's something else. But like you can't be like, oh, there's an actual competition who can recite Surah Al-A'la in the best way, and everybody has to put down money apart from one person, and then whoever wins. You couldn't do that. It has to be specific to these things. So here Imam Muhammad says, well, but he says it's fine. There's no problem in having races in Nasl wal Hafir wal Khuf. So in basically khuf is the feet of camel. So in camel races or horse races or nasl is in arrows. So marksmanship, right? So being a professional marksman with conditions is going to be permissible, but otherwise you can't do that. And I believe the Hanafis are a bit more open. You can do things like, spelling bee and stuff like that, but I don't know what the whole conditions are. Allahu alam. So anyway, the hadith is not really to do with halal and haram. So it says here that it is relevant, I guess. So they said, so Sa'id al-Musayyib, he said that the Prophet ﷺ's camel, Qaswa, she would always win. كانت تسبق كلما وقعت في سباق. Every single time she would win. And so once she lost. فكانت على المسلمين كآبة إن سبقت. They were very sad. Everyone was like, oh my God, that's really bad. What happened? Like, what does it mean about the Prophet ﷺ, etc.? So the Prophet ﷺ, he mentioned a universal principle. He said, إِنَّ النَّاسَ إِذَا رَفَعُوا شَيْئًا. When people claim that something is high and something is invincible, something is awesome, أو أرادوا رفع شيء, or they want to do that, وضعه الله. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will put it down. Why? So they don't rely on things. So we don't rely on anything other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You don't rely on, oh, Sheikh so-and-so. You don't rely on yourself. You don't rely on your own strength, your own ability, right? This person is the ultimate this person is the ultimate. There's no ultimate other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does things. Whenever you, out of a ghaira, out of a healthy jealousy for you and for our benefit, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whenever we engross ourselves in one thing, I want that one thing. That one thing is the be all and end all of my life. It is the ultimate thing. It is the solution. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala taints it and take something away from it so you can see that's not the case. So that you can have pure tawheed. It's only Allah that's perfect, and only Allah has these things, right? So this happens. People, for example, become addicted to like it's almost like just like enamored by a person, enamored by a thing, enamored by Shafi fiqh, and they realize Shafi fiqh is a human creation, right? Hanafi fiqh is a human creation. It's really good, but it's a human creation. It's not perfect, right? This ruler is the best. Khalid ibn Walid, right? The ultimate general, yeah, but not perfect. Every single thing in this life, right? لكل شيء إذا تم نقصانه فلا يغر بالطيب العيش إنسانه, right? Every single thing when it reaches its pinnacle, it will always go down. That's how it is. That's how it is. When it reaches a pinnacle, it will then go down, right? فلا يغر بطيب العيش إنسانه. Let nobody be fooled by how convenient things are working out. There are times when it's easy to be Muslim, there's time when it's hard. Time when it's good to be in the West, time when it's good to be in the East. There's a time when it's good to be married, it's time the worst thing in the world to be married. There's a time when it's good to have kids, a time when it's not good to have kids. Sometimes it's good to have money, sometimes not good to have money. Sometimes there's a lot of money in agriculture, sometimes a lot of money in technology. Sometimes there's a lot of Muslims are doing well politically, sometimes Muslims are doing bad politically. That's just how it is. Right? That's how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made the dunya. Anything that goes up necessarily comes down. Right.
Um, uh,
Go ahead.
Ustad,
Yes.
you're saying except for we shouldn't have such a perspective except towards Allah, right?
Exactly.
And what about Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam? What about the Prophet?
Well, even the Prophet passed away, right? In that sense. So, like, how they
Apart from
responded?
that,
Like, so Sayyidina Umar, he almost lost it, right? When the Prophet passed away. He was going to
yeah,
kill somebody. He said, whoever kills me, whoever says the Prophet passed away, I'll kill him. Like,
yeah,
and then Sayyidina Abu Bakr was like, no, it's not like that. So, but the point is, when we say the Prophet ﷺ himself, it's only from the point of view of Allah's kamal, right? It's not from the point of view of himself. So that's why it's kind of different. It's not.
okay,
Yeah, it's slightly different. But like, your
okay,
whole thing is like your son. Your whole life is your son. Your whole life is your business. Your whole life is hadith. Your whole life is fiqh. It's like your whole life is memorizing Quran. It's not about memorizing Quran. It's about Allah. It's
that's
not about
nice.
fiqh. It's about Allah. It's not about your son. It's about Allah. It's not about money. It's about Allah. Your country. Queen and country. It's like, Great Britain. It's like, where's Great Britain now? You know, Ottoman Empire, right? Ottoman Empire was huge, and then it's gone. You know. Uh, so whatever it is, whenever you rely on, have hopes in, have trust in, aspire to these things, and look at it as whenever you make a god other than Allah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala destroys that god. Right? And if He hates you, He makes you keep having aspirations. Like now I'm finally wealthy. Now I'm finally out of my debts, or now I'm finally everything's working out. Now I can trust this. That now I can finally find all my happiness in this person or in this thing or in these things. Like no. It's not how it's supposed to be. Just Allah. Now I finally got out of sin, and now I'm perfect. Now I'm okay. It's like no. Always relying on Allah, always coming back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, always needing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in every single thing, and having no hope and expectations and aspirations for anything other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, so now that's kind of that discussion there. The next discussion, it says Abwab as-siyar. As-siyar is the plural of sirah. So how do we normally translate the word sirah? If I say I'm going to teach a class on sirah, what would you think I would be talking about?
Well, it's now like it's been recognized as the biography of the Prophet ﷺ, but isn't it just biography on its own, the word?
Sirah, yeah. So sirah literally means it's on the pattern fi'la, and fi'la means the way in which something is done. So ikla, the way in which you eat. Jilsa, the way in which you sit. Ta'ma, the way in which something tastes. Mita, the way in which somebody dies. Okay? So sira means the way in which you do sayr, the way in which you travel. That's what it literally means. Sira means the way in which you travel, right? But So usually when we say today, we say seerah, that would mean the biography of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He studied seerah. There was a class on seerah. But seerah and bab as-siyar means battles, right? And so when you say seerah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you mean the battles of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And often books of seerah actually begin from the Medinan period, and they do not begin with the Meccan period. Why would they do that?
That's when the battles began in Medina.
That's when the battles began. So you're talking about the political history of Islam, right? You say Sirah would be like, oh, the political history of Islam. So you're not going to be interested in what happened in Medina, what happened before, because it's not political, right? So yes, you find other Sirahs will add that, but like I believe al-Waqidi, like his Sirah. So Waqidi, for example, historian, he wrote on, for example, the conquests of the Levant, the conquest of Iraq, the conquests of North Africa, Central Asia, and he wrote on the Sirah when it begins with from Medina on, because that's when jihad starts, right? So when you talk about Sirah, we might call it, you can translate it as the biography of the Prophet. You can also translate it as the conquests or the military history of the Prophet or the political life of the Prophet, something like that. It's also called Maghazi, right? Kitab al-Maghazi, which means the battles, right? That's what it's called. Right? Khair. And so just as a tangent, which is more important, studying Sirah or studying fiqh?
Studying Sirah.
Why? Why'd you say that?
Well, Sirah is the life and the example of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam we're supposed to obey, and isn't a lot of fiqh derived from his life anyways, the Sirah?
Okay. So how about like if I wanted to learn about Islam, should I study Voyage of the Traveler or should I read, for example, Life of Prophet Muhammad by Martin Lings?
Hmm. Yeah, I guess when you put it that way, Reliance of the Traveler.
Okay. So Voyage of the Traveler tells you lots of rules, but if you but okay, let's put it this way. Imagine if I knew wudu, but I had no idea about the Battle of Uhud. I don't even know what that is. Like I know about like the difference between Ibn Hajar and Ramli and where they debated on some issues of wudu, but I didn't know about Uhud. In fact, I don't know about Uhud, and I don't even know about if I said Meccan period, I couldn't talk about a single thing that happened in the Meccan period. And I can't talk about a single thing that happened in the Medinan period. In fact, I don't even know about Mecca and Medina. Like, do you think there's gonna be a problem?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a problem. It's a problem for something else.
Yeah,
Like
so now I'm
maybe,
like, you asked me when was Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam alive? I said 4,000 years ago. Is that problematic?
yeah,
Like, where did he live? He lived in Saudi Arabia. It's like, what do you mean Saudi Arabia? Like, he lived in Saudi Arabia? Like, there was one kid in a masjid in England, and I walked into the masjid, and he says, "Why are you here?" I said, "I'm coming to pray." He says, "Yeah, but you're not Muslim." So, yeah, I am. I have a beard. I have a hat on. I'm a Muslim. He says, "Yeah, but you're not Pakistani." So I said, "Was the Prophet Pakistani?" He said, "Yes." So we have an Aqidah issue, right? So there's a certain amount of Sira that you need to know in order to understand the basics of Islam. Like, if you don't know any Sira whatsoever, you're not even a Muslim. Like, you think that Prophet lived 8,000 years ago and he was in Japan, right? That's a problem, right? You're not actually Muslim because that's not who the Prophet is. So there's a certain amount of Sira that you have to know. And then also for the average Muslim, what's the point of knowing rules of wudu if you don't have the moral and the moral motive to do that? And so you read about the seerah on an iman level is very, very important. So arguably, seerah is way, way more important than studying fiqh on some levels. And it's way less important on other levels because it doesn't tell you much about the rules, right? And what's the point of knowing the whole life of the Prophet? We don't know how to pray. We don't know how to do sujood sahu, right? What's the point, right? But so it is very important, right? It's very important. Okay, seerah is super important. So, for your kids, Sunday school, kids class, great thing to do. Everybody loves stories, everybody loves stories, and every single story of the Prophet ﷺ has an imani thing. right? And it's like it has something you can take away from it, right? Whereas fiqh is not always imani, is it? It's like most 99% of fiqh has nothing to do with me and you. It doesn't apply to us, right? So it is really important. Anyway, so here is talking about jihad, rules of jihad. It's not going to be comprehensive. So it says أبواب السير, right? أخبرنا مالك أخبرنا يحيى بن سعيد أنه بلغه عن ابن عباس. So he says Imam Malik narrates from Yahya and Sa'id al-Ansari that it has reached him. There's a gap in the chain here. From Ibn Abbas that he said ما ظهر الغلول في قوم قط إلا ألقى في قلوبهم الرعب ولا فشى الزنا في قوم قط إلا كثر فيهم الموت ولا نقص قوم المكيال والميزان إلا قطع عليهم الرزق وما حكم قوم بغير الحق إلا فشى فيهم الدم ولا خطر قوم بالعهد إلا سلط عليهم العدو. Okay, so he says, so this is also important. So he's going to quote Ibn Abbas. Okay, he's going to quote Ibn Abbas. So Ibn Abbas is going to tell us about a series of maxims of life, how Allah deals with people in life. Now, one would assume that someone like Ibn Abbas would be quoting the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but Ibn Abbas is not actually quoting the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He's saying X is the case. This is important because frequently we will find hadiths that are ascribed to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but also ascribed to the Sahaba. Right? And that's pretty important because what if the deen gets changed? So it's one thing to stem from the wisdom and the intuition and the insight of the Sahaba. It's another thing to get the words of the Sahaba and put it in the mouth of the Prophet. That's very dangerous, right? That's super dangerous. So that actually happens quite a lot. That actually happens quite a lot. And one of the criticisms that the muhaddithin will make is so-and-so, a mistake that he made is he would raise a stopped hadith, meaning a hadith that stops at the Sahabi, he's quoting, he actually raises it to the Prophet and ascribes it to the Prophet. The Prophet said, right? And an example of that is the hadith we saw way earlier in fasting. So Imam Malik, he narrates from Ibn Umar that Ibn Umar said, so this is Ibn Umar's fatwa, that whoever doesn't resolve to fast before Fajr has no fast. If you don't resolve to fast at night, then your fast doesn't count. That quote became a hadith. And you find it as a hadith in some of the books, not in Bukhari and Muslim, but in other places, you find it as the words of the Prophet ﷺ, and that the Prophet ﷺ said, if you don't resolve to fast before Fajr, then it doesn't count. And that's the Shafi school, right? So you have to intend to fast before Fajr, otherwise your fast doesn't count. Imam Nasa'i goes through the different chains of transmission and demonstrates that this is not the words of the Prophet ﷺ. These are the words of Ibn Umar or his sister Hafsa. And it's a mistake to ascribe it to the Prophet ﷺ. So whenever we see a hadith, a quote that's quoting the Prophet ﷺ and quoting a Sahabi, we have to be very careful and check, right? And the Muwatta is a good place because the Muwatta is, another reason why I focus so much on the Muwatta is the hadiths are the cleanest of hadiths. Imam Shafi said, after the book of Allah, the Quran, there is no hadith, there's no collection of hadith that is more sound than the Muwatta. So what you will find is there will be hadiths in the Muwatta that, for example, are quoting a Sahabi, and that hadith turns into the quotes of the Prophet ﷺ later on through other mistakes. And sometimes it will be confusing who's saying what. And so coming back to the Muwatta is a good place. And then ultimately we have to gather the chains and see the different narrations and see who's strong and who's weak and who made a mistake, etc. Right? So I believe this is a hadith. It says, comes as a hadith. 1 second. What is it? Wala fasha. Pretty sure I've heard this as a hadith of the Prophet. Ma fasha. Okay, so this is a hadith. It's where is it found? So it says, yeah, so there's a hadith like this that says, there's a hadith that's very similar to this in Tabarani and Ibn Majah and other places. And it's very, very similar. And so you find it's basically turned into a hadith. So in reality, what they're doing is they're basically merging these quotes, and it's also coming from the students. So what's happened is this comes from the students of Abdullah ibn Abbas. So maybe like one of the grand students is mixing up, like they studied with the students of Ibn Abbas, and they're mixing up what Ibn Abbas said with something else. It's all kind of getting mixed up, and so there's a problem. So yeah. So it says something like. Where is it? Yeah, it's basically the same. Similar kind of thing about zina and basically what happens, and if they don't, they're not fair, etc. But this is the sounder version here that Imam Malik said that that Yahya ibn Sa'id said, and he has a gap in the chain here to begin with, that he said that Ibn Abbas said. So he says, Ma ظهر الغلود, ill-gotten gains, right? How is this relevant to jihad? Is that in jihad you can take spoils of war. So, these soldiers, they conquer a city, they kill an army, and they take the horses, they take the gold, the weapons, and then somebody pockets things. Somebody says, "Oh, this horse is nice. I'll keep it for myself," instead of giving it back to the ruler to distribute fairly based on the rules in the ayah of the Quran about spoils of war. So this is called ghulul, ill-gotten gains. So ما ظهر الغلول في قوم قط إلا ألقى في قلوبهم الرعب. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah never puts, ill-gotten gains never becomes apparent in a people except that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts fear in their heart, terror in their heart. ولا فشى الزنا في قوم قط إلا كثر فيهم الموت. Right? And zina never becomes common among people except death becomes common among them. Right? It's a major issue. Right? So being conservative, being sexually conservative and conservative with gender interactions is a way that you keep the peace. It's a clever way of being happy. So it's very important. Many people they think like strictness is about being strict for the sake of being strict. It's not. Strict is not being strict for the sake of being strict. Strict is just having fun in a clever way. Right? Having fun in a clever way, that's all. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, yeah, do whatever you want. Enjoy your bodies, right? You're attracted to somebody, go and marry them and sleep with them. Fantastic. Enjoy yourself, right? But do it in a clever way, because if you don't do it in a clever way, you will be unhappy. So when there's a lot of mixing, people will not be happy. When people don't even know what happened at that wedding, because everyone was drunk. It's like, people are not going to be happy. Go and look at Hollywood. Are these people happy? They're not happy people, right? Go in the hood. Is that these people are not happy, right? People who are wealthy people who do lots of haram, they're not happy people, right? So being conservative and drawing lines, right, it makes people happy. It's a good way of doing things. So zina is not bad because it's pleasurable, right? That's not true. Or because Allah hates people using their bodies. That's not why. Like that's not why we say that. But it's because you've done it in a stupid way that doesn't make you happy or other people and makes room for misunderstandings. ولا نقص قوم المكيال والميزان إلا قطع عليهم رزق. And nobody steals property. Nobody and no people doesn't give the full weight in volume and weight in weight, except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes the risk away. So whenever you try and cut corners with people, right? And this is a really scary thing, like wailul lil mutaffifin, right? It's very scary, right? ولا حكم قوم بغير الحق إلا فشا فيهم الدم, right? And no people applies the falsehood except that bloodshed becomes common among them. So they say we need something other than the Sharia. The Sharia is old and backward, and we shouldn't have that. So what happens is murder becomes common. ولا خطر قوم بالعهد, and no people break a pact, right? إلا سلط عليهم العدو, and this is exactly what happened with the Mongols, right? Genghis Khan sent the messenger, right? And what did the Muslims do to the messenger? Who knows what happened? Genghis Khan said, basically, I'm coming to attack you guys, surrender. So what did the Muslims do? The Muslims cut his head off, right? They were proud. And they're like, we're a superpower. Get out of our face. That's haram. You can't do that. You cannot kill a messenger. Right? You cannot kill a messenger. So khatara qawmun bil ahdi. They didn't keep their pact. Right? I'm sure historically there were times where non-Muslims, Jews and Christians, were abused. You can't do that. You can't abuse the weak. Right? Dhimmi means your responsibility. When a Muslim or a Jew is part of the Muslim state, he's under your responsibility like a child, under your responsibility. So it's an amana, it's a trust. So Muslims become strong, become overconfident, don't care about halal and haram, and they break the pact with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They don't abide with the Sharia. إِلَّا سُلِّطَ عَلَيْهِمُ الْعَدُوُّ, except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes the enemy take over them. Muslim Spain, right? That's what happened. They all turned their backs on each other, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave authority to the enemy over them, and they lost everything, right? Muslims today, same thing, right? So it's a very important concept. So the idea is important, number one, and the concept as well that a hadith, a quote from a Sahabi, turning into a hadith is also important, right? We always have to be very careful of that.
Is there a term for that in Arabic? Like
what a Sahih hadith, a Sahih hadith turning into a
yeah.
It's called they say yarfa' it's called rafa' al-mawqufat. Raising of the mawquf means a quote of a Sahabi. So you are raising it, meaning you're ascribing the words of a Sahabi to the Prophet. So it's called rafa' al-mawqufat. Yeah. It's a major problem, right? That's obviously a huge problem. And the fact that Muslims are cognizant of it and dealt with it is also important. Because then you can show, oh, non-Muslims, like, yeah, this happened, guys. It happened, and they were aware of it, and they're weary of it. And so when we say the hadith is sahih, it means we've gone through and dug through those things. And we're like, yeah, this is it's not like something like, oh, it's not something that, like, so it's called, there's a term for it in English, you call it like like
Retroactively?
it's not retroactively, it's like, I can't remember what it is, but basically, like there's this Orientalist called Joseph Schacht, right? He was like a very important. He basically observed it, right? He wasn't aware that the Muslims were aware of it, right? As most Orientalists are, and he was like, "Look, this is what Muslims did. There's probably like a bunch of hadiths from the Prophet ﷺ, and then suddenly became thousands because they basically made up Sharia as they went along, and they made up the Deen, and then they just kept whenever they needed a proof, they keep ascribing things to the Prophet ﷺ, right? So did it happen? Yes. But was it identified? Yes. So he makes a claim that, oh yeah, it wasn't identified. And the whole deen is like that. Just basically like, yeah, like all hadith are just like made up, you know. Whereas when you look at the hadith critics, that's what they're doing all the time. They're very sensitive to these things, the mistakes that people make, the kind of mistakes that they make. It's not just, oh, someone says weak. It's like the actual mistakes that this kind of person makes. They'll add in somebody in the chain of transmission or in a particular place or whatever it is, etc. But it's called Rafa' al-Mawqufat, raising of stopped hadiths, a hadith that stop at the Sahaba, they raised them to the level of the Prophet. Okay, so akhbarana, so there's a difference. Here's two concepts though. In fiqh, using the fatwa of a Sahabi is one thing. I'm saying I'm going to defer to his judgment, or I'm going to use his fatwa as strong supporting evidence, right? That's one thing. The other thing is to put those words in the mouth of the Prophet and say, Qala Rasulullah. That's something else, right? These are two different things. One's a fiqh issue, a legal issue that many of us will do. And the other thing is a hadith mistake, right? That is totally wrong. So أخبرنا مالك أخبرنا نافع عن ابن عمر أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم and I'm pretty sure in Jonathan Brown, I shared with you that book by Jonathan Brown, Salah, right? I'm pretty sure he has a book called Misquoting Muhammad. Pretty sure he'll have tons of examples of that.
Okay.
If you look at it, Misquoting Muhammad, Jonathan Brown, I'm pretty sure he'll have infinite examples of that in that book. أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم بعث سرية قبل نجد فغنموا إبلا كثيرة فكان سهمانهم 12 بعيرا ونفلوا بعيرا بعيرا. So here it just gives an example of spoils of war. So Malik from Nafi' from Ibn Umar that the Messenger of Allah sent a Sariyah, he sent a troop of soldiers in the direction of the Najd, the northeast of Saudi Arabia. فَغَنِمُوا إِبِلًا كَثِيرًا, and so they came back with spoils of war, with many, many, many camels. فَكَانَ سُهْمَانُهُم. So how does jihad work? You should tell them, become Muslim. They say, no. Say, accept to become a vassal state, VASSAL, a vassal state, meaning you be under us, you stick to your own religion, and you just agree not to fight us, and you agree to pay a tax. And we'll defend you. We'll defend your borders. We'll look after you. But you just agree not to fight us, not to harbor enemy spies against us, and you be a vassal state, right? And they say no. Okay, in which case the war, right? So for like a vassal state was like not Sardinia. What was it called? Malta, the island of Malta, right? That was like a vassal state for ages, like a 100% Christian state. That's just under the Muslims. Like they just paid tribute. They paid a tribute, they paid a tax on a yearly basis, and that was it. Right. So anyway, they said no. So then what happens when they say no? Okay, then there's open war. So then they go in and they fight these people, kill whoever of the soldiers, and take spoils of war. So there's like, oh, you've now lost the war, and so you lose your property. Right. So they took all these camels back. فَكَانَ سُهْمَانُهُم, each soldier, and the soldiers are kind of different, they were given 12 camels each. وَنُفِّلُوا بَعِيرًا بَعِيرًا, and there were more camels left, so they were given even more. Right? So basically there was a fixed amount that they were given, and that's something else. So وقال محمد كان النفل لرسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم ينفل من الخمس أهل الحاجة وقد قال الله تعالى. Okay, we'll come to this inshallah next week, though it's a bit more complex than that. But that's the basic idea, but we'll come back to this hadith inshallah next week. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك.